Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Awesome. So yes, I did receive your email, Alyssa. I did respond to it. Okay, so the last section we talk about for the semester is travel and tourism. Not sure how many of you actually want to be or work in tourism. Interesting, it's an interesting field. So without further ado, let's get started. So what exactly is a tourist attraction? What's the definition of a tourist attraction? And so basically it means it's a cultural or historic or natural or amusement or leisure value. So it has, again, it has cultural, historic, natural, or some sort of amusement or leisure value attached to it. And there's all sorts of examples of what exactly does that mean. So cultural, or think about it like, for instance, a monument would be an example of something that has a cultural, of course, you could also say historic value to it, at least if you're an American. And so if you think about a monument, like let's say, for instance, Mount Rushmore would be an example of something that has at least US cultural value. And again, it has historical value, at least here in the United States. So another example, if you think about it, would be like national parks would be another example of something that has, in this case, natural value. And so if you think about a national park or maybe a zoo like the San Diego Zoo, for instance, or something that just happens to center around nature, whether it's the San Gabriel Mountains that are right here in Southern California, whether it's our beautiful beaches that we have here in Southern California. Those are all examples of something that has natural value. Now, the picture that I'm showing you here is a peak that I climbed in Ecuador called Cotopaxi. It also happens to be, by the way, an active volcano. So if any of you are lucky enough to go to Ecuador in the future, it doesn't look like this because it erupted, I think, the day after we hiked it, or maybe 2 days after we hiked it, it erupted. No longer looks like this. It was a pretty massive eruption by all accounts. I wasn't around when that happened, so I don't know. But anyways, another example of what we mean by a natural value would be something like this. This is a hot spring. Oh gosh, where did I take this picture at? This is a hot springs in New Zealand, outside of a little town called Rotorua, and it's a hot springs in New Zealand. So just like we have geysers here, and if you've ever been to Yellowstone National Park, they also have geysers or something similar in New Zealand. This is also another example of natural beauty. This is Iguazu Falls. I don't know if anybody's been to the border of Argentina and Brazil, but this is the Iguazu Falls, one of the biggest falls, I think not sure by water volume, but it's one of the biggest falls in the world. And so this is another example would be something that has historic and cultural value would be, for instance, if you think about an art gallery, but also if you think about a museum. So I don't know if anybody's ever been to Paris. So this is a picture of the Louvre, right, in Paris, France. This is not my picture. I mean, I've been there, but not my picture. And so I'm borrowing this picture from somebody, but just to kind of give you an example of what I mean by what exactly is a tourist attraction. And this is also another example of a tourist attraction. This is a palace outside of Vienna. This is where the kings and queens of Austria. And I think Mozart performed here. Another example of what I mean by a tourist attraction. But you also need to think about a tourist attraction as being sort of an example, a famous building, could be a famous stadium or arena as well. And so, for instance, in the United States, we don't really have many old stadiums outside of maybe Wrigley Field and Fenway Park. But if you go to Europe, they have more. It's an older culture, so they're more apt to have more iconic stadiums. For instance, this is also another example of a historic building or palace. This is outside of, oh shoot, I think this is Prague, where I took this picture. Other examples of what exactly is would be a tourist attraction. If we think about a theme park, which we already talked about, if you think about Disneyland or Disney World, certainly an amusement park like Knott's or Six Flags could be considered a tourist attraction because of its amusement or leisure value. If you think about a famous street or district, like this is an example, this is a picture of Broadway. If anybody's ever been to Broadway over in New York City, it's a tourist attraction for people who love to go to the theater, but just if you want to be around hustle and bustle in New York City, Broadway or Times Square, right, are good areas to go to. If you think about an ethnic community also, which I don't have pictures of, but if you think about Olvera Street in Los Angeles is another example of a tourist attraction just from its cultural perspective. If what else? If you think about shopping, so cruise lines or a form of leisure, but also if you think about shopping malls, this is the most popular shopping mall in the world pre-COVID. This is the Dubai Mall in the United Arab Emirates. And again, it's the busiest shopping mall in the world, at least pre-COVID. It brought in the most tourists in the world to come and shop at the Dubai Mall. And again, it's in the United Arab Emirates, the UAE. And so if you think about shopping, for instance, and the building that you see behind, by the way, is the tallest building in the world. I think that's the, I can't pronounce the name. I can't, Arub something. I can't, Khalifa, something like that. I'm totally mispronouncing the name, but that happens to also be the tallest building in the world, if you're curious. And also, if you think about casinos, if you think about wineries or restaurants, are also a form of tourism. And I'm talking about fine dining, okay? I'm not talking about going to In-N-Out or going to McDonald's. I'm talking fine dining when we talk about restaurants. But anyways, this is a picture of a winery outside of, Mendoza, Argentina. So if you think about wine trails and food, they tend to mix, especially when you think about wine. And so a lot of countries or areas of the United States, but also throughout the world, are essentially developing wine trails because they're trying to create a revenue stream through what they call eno-tourism. And so you generally want to avoid tourist traps, and I'll talk about that shortly. So anyways, what's the most visited shopping mall? The most visited shopping mall is the Dubai Mall, which I just let you see a picture of. Again, the most visited shopping mall is the Dubai Mall. And what exactly is the Judgment of Paris? So the Judgment of Paris was a contest that happened in 1976. And it was a contest between California wines and French wines. And so the thought was historically, is that the best wines are made in France. That's always been sort of the consensus, historically speaking. Now, there ended up being this contest, and when you have all these, wine tasting experts, and essentially had a contest between the California wines and the French wines. And it turned out that all of them, not all of them, but it turned out that the California wines from Napa Valley ended up defeating the French wines. And so it turns out from the Judgment of Paris that the best wines in the world are actually made in the state of California, and they're not made in France. And so because of this, Napa Valley becomes a huge tourist hub for wine tasters. And so if you've ever been to Napa Valley, it's still inundated by traffic because the infrastructure hasn't been built up to accommodate all these tourists. And the reason that Napa became a hotbed for wine tasting was because of the Judgment of Paris that happened in 1976. Any questions? So generally speaking, you want to avoid tourist traps. And the reason I say this is because when we're on vacation, right, time is of essence. It's important, especially if you're an American. Unlike, other places in the world where you're giving weeks and weeks and weeks, if not a month at least, of vacation. We're one of those places in the world where we only give our employees a week or maybe 2 weeks if you're lucky of vacation time. And so you don't want to waste time. And so tourist traps, unfortunately, are sometimes developed by, local residents think this is kind of a cool place to go visit, but you may not think it's a cool place to go visit. So it ends up becoming a tourist trap because it ends up wasting your time. So, for example, let me go through all these pictures. So, for example, I don't know if anybody's ever been to South Dakota, but if you ever go to South Dakota, you're going to run across this billboard, or these billboards, I should say, throughout the entire interstate. It's just going to be, check out Wall Drug. You're 100 miles from Wall Drug, so on and so forth. You're just going to keep going by until at some point in time you're like going, damn, what exactly is Wall Drug? Well, it's a tourist trap. Okay, unless you're into souvenirs, unless you're into things that are a little bit cheesy, unless you need to go and use the restroom or get a little snack, it really is kind of a waste of time. But if you need those things, then obviously it's not a waste. But if you're going there just to check out Wall's Drug, it kind of is a tourist trap. So it's kind of a waste of time if you decide to stop there, as an example. All right. So reasons that travel has grown. It's now essentially over $1 billion industry. Is partially happens because of air travel. I know occasionally we hear that a plane crashes and everybody died on board, which is obviously a tragedy, no question about it. But if you really examine the history of air travel, we are right now living in the best time ever, safest time ever when it comes to planes. So not only are the planes better, safer, and faster, right? They're going to get you there in one piece. And so I guess the only part about planes nowadays that seems to be, at least for me, that's the one drawback. I'm not very tall nor very big. So if you're just, obviously we're online, so you can't even see how tall I am, but I'm not very tall, maybe 5'10", so average height, I think that's average. It might even be below average. Anyways, it just seems that the rows of seats have gotten smaller and smaller and smaller to fit in more people. I don't know if that's true. It seems that way to me, because when I get into these seats and planes, I'm like, gosh, I can barely fit. I'm not even that big. But anyways, that said, the planes are better, safer, faster. And there's also more airports that are located throughout the world, throughout the United States. And so the plane can get you there fairly quickly. And what is the busiest airport, at least pre-COVID? The busiest airport was Hartsfield Jackson Atlanta Airport. So again, Hartsfield Jackson Atlanta International Airport is the busiest airport in the country. I think that's the hub for, gosh, I think it's the hub for Delta Airlines. Again, Hartsfield, Jackson Atlanta International Airport. It's busier than JFK out of New York. It's much busier than LAX here in Los Angeles, although we'll see what happens post after they finish all the reconstruction at LAX. It's kind of crazy right now. It's busier than Heathrow, you name it. So the Interstate Highway Act of 1956 boosted local and regional tourism. So the person that was credited with the Interstate Highway Act of 1956 was a guy by the name of President Eisenhower. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of President Eisenhower. He also is famous for saying industrial military complex. And we should be very leery and careful about the growing political power of the military. Has anybody ever heard of President Eisenhower? So President Eisenhower is the person that is, no, that was FDR, Marcella. FDR ended up with a polio and ended up in a wheelchair. So Ike never ended up in a wheelchair, as far as I know. He was a general in the military. And so he is the guy who, again, very, forward-thinking man, thought to himself, in order for our nation's economy to improve, we need to create better roads from sea to shining sea, right? Sort of thing, that's going to connect the Atlantic with the Pacific. And so really, if you think about the interstates that cross America, whether it's Interstate 10 or Interstate 20 or all these other interstates that cross the United States, a lot of them were funded by President Eisenhower. And so because of this act, it was able to boost local and regional tourism. So places that were not so easy to get to, by car at least, were now easier to get to, whether they were local tourist destinations or regional tourist destinations. They were easier to get to because there was better interstates being built throughout the United States, thanks to the Interstate Highway Act of 1956. Also, hotels. The idea of hotels is a rather new thing, actually. The idea of having hotels next to the highways. Those came along when the highways were being built, if you're FYI. And so now there's more hotels, different pricing points. So if you want to, be glamorous and stay at a 4-star hotel, you certainly can. Or you can be cheap like me. I stay at the 1-star hotels. I just need a bed. So, but there's different pricing points depending on who you are, right? 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star hotels, different pricing points. There's more hotels all over the place. And so where you can stop, go to sleep, and get back on the road again. So there's more hotels throughout the United States. And what is the largest hotel chain in terms of revenue? It is the Marriott. The Marriott International is the hotel chain that generates the most revenue, I believe, in the world. It's not the biggest in terms of properties, but it is the biggest in terms of revenue. So again, Marriott International. Ports. There's more and bigger ports being built throughout the United States. So I don't know. Obviously, here in Southern California, we only have our biggest port, at least nearby. If you live in SoCal, is Long Beach. And the city of Long Beach, I think it's the city of Long Beach, but the city of Long Beach, and I think maybe the state of California, has been spending lots of money to make the port here in Los Angeles bigger and better. I think the thought is they're going to have bigger cruise ships to come to Long Beach and leave Long Beach. And I guess they're going to, I think they're going to Alaska, and I think they're going down to Mexico. I'm not sure, but also they're building bigger ports, a gigantic port actually out in Miami. And so the reason that they're building these bigger and better ports, not only on the West Coast, but out on the East Coast, is because these cruise ships are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. These cruise ships are like the size of small towns nowadays, at least in terms of accommodations. And so they can sit up to, over 6,000 people on some of these ships. And so that's the reason why you need bigger ports, because the ships keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger with more amenities. In other words, a lot of these ships have like movie theaters, have water slides everywhere. These ships have it all. You can go and gamble, so on and so forth. Marriott. Yes, it was the Marriott. So computers have also led to a growth in travel, because nowadays all of us can be our own individual travel agent. The reason that is, going back a little bit, is because we all have public access to Sabre. So Sabre was a computer program that only the airlines had access to that program initially. So this is the reason why, right? And when well, you guys don't remember because you guys aren't old enough, but when we used to have to go to a travel agent back in the day, and the travel agent is the only one besides the airlines that would have access to Sabre. And this was basically an online computer system letting you know when flights left a certain city and where they were headed to, and when they were going to land to that other city. And then eventually, online travel agencies like Expedia got access to Sabre. And so this led to the explosion of online travel agencies. And eventually, now all of us have access to Sabre. And so really don't need online travel agencies. You can all do it. Well, you can still use them, but you could really bypass the online travel agencies if you want to. But anyways, this is the reason why all of us can now plan our own vacations and even circumvent the travel agencies, whether it's online or traditional, if you want to, because you have access to Sabre. So, what online travel agency created the dynamic package? Well, first and foremost, let me ask the question, what is a dynamic package? So no, it's not hotel, food, and travel, but that's a good guess. So it basically means dynamic package means hotel, yes, that's part of it for sure, but it also means your flight, and it also means a rental car. So dynamic package again means it's your hotel, it's your flight, and it is also um, a rental car. And so it's essentially a package. We buy the entire bundle together as a package. You get the car, the flight, and the hotel all through one bundle or package. And so the online travel agency that created the dynamic package was Expedia. Expedia was the pioneer when it comes to that. Now, what was the first airlines to create a website? That was Southwest Airlines. So Southwest Airlines first to create a website. Okay, so visitors and convention bureaus. So visitors and convention bureaus are really important because first and obviously foremost, they bring in tourists or visitors to your city, but they're also bringing in conventions. And so the thought behind bringing in the conventions is because you're bringing in the business traveler who's coming in to the city for a few days to attend a convention. And so this is a very important revenue stream for cities, and it's a very important revenue stream for hotels. This is why when conventions, basically we didn't have any for a year, it really hurt the hotel industry immensely because an important revenue stream are these business travelers that are coming into a city just for business purposes only, well, supposedly, and they're going to spend a few days in that particular city. And so anyways, their primary revenue stream is a hotel and motel bed tax or a lodging tax. That is the primary revenue stream for the visitor and convention bureaus, or sometimes they're just called CVBs. And so I don't know if anybody ever looks at your hotel bill. I don't know how many of you have been to Vegas or San Diego, or you've gone traveling. And when you go travel and spend the night at a hotel, oftentimes when you look at your bill, there's going to have a tax. So there's going to be taxes on your bill. And one of your taxes is going to say, should say something like hotel, motel tax, or they might say bed tax, or it might say a lodging tax. And so know that tax, at least part of that money, is going to the local CVB. It's going to the visitors and convention bureaus. It might go to something else as well, but essentially you're being taxed for being a tourist by that particular city, and that city is going to use that tax money for the visitors and convention bureaus or something else. And so what the Visitor and Convention Bureau does, at least the smaller ones, they promote local tourist attractions or they promote regional tourist attractions. Now the larger CVBs, so like for instance, a larger CVB might be Orange County or in the city of Anaheim, right? Those are probably going to be larger. So those CVBs are going to promote, let's say, national or global tourist attractions. So for instance, if we're talking about, let's say, the Visitor and Convention Bureau of Orange County, obviously we have Disneyland there, which is a huge tourist attraction, not only nationally, but also globally. We also obviously have Knott's Berry Farm. We have obviously the beaches that are right there in Orange County that are beautiful. The mountains aren't too far away. There's all these kind of cool things that you can do in Orange County that are attractive to people who live not only in the United States, but also all around the world. And so they promote these locations so to bring tourists, but they also want to bring conventions to Orange County. So their first responsibility is to identify these local tourist attractions. So that means working with local residents or local tourist professionals and identifying, okay, so what's a cool museum locally? What are the cool recreational areas locally? is there, again, I already mentioned amusement parks or theme parks locally that people can go to that you think are um, good to know for tourists. And so identifying again these local tourist attractions. And or also they may also organize tours of these local tourist attractions, whether it's historical, recreational, or cultural. So here in Long Beach, for instance, we utilize the double-decker bus. I don't know if anybody's ever been on these double-decker buses here in Long Beach, but they have like these buses, and essentially you can tour the city of Long Beach, or at least tourist attractions locally. And various cities or regions have these in place. Number three, they're trying to attract convention and meeting planners. And so usually there's like a big brochure or folder or some sort of EPK or something that has all this information about the particular city, trying to convince meeting planners or convention planners to have their conventions or meetings in that particular city. And so that's the other job of the CBB. They're trying to generate or bring tourists to generate a significant amount of tourism revenue to help the local economy. So what convention center generates the most revenue, at least in the United States? That would be Las Vegas. So again, Las Vegas is the convention center that generates the most revenue, even during COVID. What city has the highest occupancy rate? Now, this is pre-COVID, so I don't know during COVID, but I imagine this is the case even during COVID, would be Las Vegas. So what city has the highest occupancy rate? It's Las Vegas. What convention center generates the most revenue? That would be the Las Vegas Convention and Visitor Authority, which is again located in Las Vegas. If you're curious, Miami's or Florida, I should say, is number two. So again, Vegas, the Vegas Convention Center generates the most revenue. The Las Vegas Convention and Visitor Authority, and Florida is a distant second. So what country has the most visitors pre-COVID? Now, this is again pre-COVID. And so that would be France. France generates the most, or I should say, attracts the most international tourists. Obviously, if you're into wine tasting, very good wines. If you're into culture or history, Paris is pretty cool. But you should know a little bit of French before you go, for sure. Otherwise, they're gonna not like you. But what country again has the most visitors? That would be again France. What region of the world has the most travelers? That would be Europe. So again, what region of the world has the most travelers? It would be the European continent or region. What country generates the most tourism revenue? Now, again, this is pre-COVID. Now, once, we go back to quote unquote, whatever is normal, I assume this country will again be number one because it was number one by a long shot. That would be the United States. The United States is the country that generates the most tourism revenue. So the United States generates, again, most tourism revenue by far. I believe it generated over $200 billion was generated by tourists in the United States. What country's tourists spend the most money? That would be the Chinese. So the Chinese tourists spend the most money. So if you're, serving or helping Chinese tourists, it should be nice to all people, but just know that, China generates that country has the tourists that generate the most money globally. not specifically the United States, but globally. What's the world's most visited city? It really depends on if you're thinking about overnight visits or just visits. If we're talking about just visits, that would be Hong Kong. So again, if you're just talking about visits, just people coming to the city and spending the day there and going back, that would be Hong Kong. If you're talking about overnight visits, that would be Bangkok. Bangkok, Thailand has the most overnight visitors. But if we're just talking visits, that would be Hong Kong. In what city do visitors spend the most money? That would be in Dubai. Dubai, United Emirates, is the city where visitors spend the most money. Apparently, I've never been. Dubai is quite expensive. Bangkok.
Professor, really quick, can you just give a little bit more detail on the difference between, I wrote down Chinese tourists generate the most, I just wrote $.
On tourism.
Okay, they spend the most money on tourism, but people in Dubai, like when people visit Dubai, that's when visitors spend the most money there.
The city that's the most, where this, the city that where visitors spend the most money of any city in the world, it is Dubai.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
One single city where visitors spend, in that one city, spend the most money, it's Dubai.
Awesome. Thanks.
If you're wondering where LA's at, we're way, we're like in 15th place. If you're curious about LA. And New York's not even in the top 10. One of the big downfalls about the city of Los Angeles, if you're just kind of curious, all of you know this already, it's traffic. It's not easy to get around Southern California because we have just way too many cars and we don't have a really good mass transit system. If we had a really good mass transit system, we would be far higher on the list in terms of where visitors spend money at. But until that gets resolved, we're not going to make it anywhere in the top 10. All right, so increase the number of tourists. So if you want to increase the number of tourists, you need to develop a tourism infrastructure. So again, if you want to increase the number of tourists, you need to develop your tourism infrastructure. So again, going back to Los Angeles, or just even Southern California, one of the big problems that we have here in Southern California, we have a pretty good tourism infrastructure when it comes to hotels, when it comes to obviously plenty of vacation sites to check out in Southern California. I mean, we truly live in paradise. The weather is generally very good. We have a pretty good port. We have good convention centers, all those sorts of things. The one bad thing that we have here in Southern California is we don't have highways or roads, at least not where you can easily get around. And so you're always stuck in traffic in Southern California. So you need to improve the roadways if you're going to have a tourism infrastructure. So that means good roadways or highways or freeways, good ports, good convention centers, plenty of good hotels, and plenty of tourist attractions. That's what I mean by a tourism infrastructure. And so what region of the world has the most tourists? As I mentioned before, it is Europe. Europe really has the best tourism infrastructure. I don't know how many of you have been to Europe. Maybe you, when you go off to summer vacation, maybe you can go check out Europe. I don't know. But really, Europe is pretty cool when it comes to tourism, just because you can hop on the train and really you can get from one country to another fairly easy just using the train. The rail system is pretty good. And they have hostels and all those sorts of things. And so it's pretty easy to get around Europe, especially if you're traveling on a budget. So obviously other ways of increasing the number of tourists is obviously through advertising, whether it's traditional advertising using the media, whether it's social media, or whether it's a direct campaign. Now, if you're wondering what direct campaign means, it means where the tourist destination literally reaches out to you and sends you a direct mailing. Like, for instance, my mom used to gamble a lot. And so the casinos would send her a direct mail or letter and say, hey, come and visit us during this week. We're going to give you a comp. And so they would send her direct information. So she would go and spend money at the casinos. And so another example of what I mean by creating a campaign would be something like this.
Two extremes, Patagonia and the driest desert in the world. And in between you have beautiful cities to hang out in.
Es una sensación de inmensidad donde el alma está como expandida.
I've never quite seen a landscape like this.
J'ai l'impression qu'on est seul au monde et qu'on découvre comme une nouvelle planète.
We've been away for 3 weeks and we don't miss home at all. So we feel very comfortable here. And very safe as well. Yeah.
Du musst da hingehen, du musst es sehen, du musst es fühlen, du musst es greifen.
Sensoriale quasi, no? Perché prende la vista, prende un po' il cuore, si emoziona.
Mi dà una buona centratura stare qua.
I remember driving and just looking at everything and thinking, oh my God, this place is unbelievable.
For me, I'm living my dream here.
So this is a great campaign put on by Chile, trying to bring more tourists to Chile. It really is a pretty cool place. If you've ever been, Santiago is super cool. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I've only been to Santiago. I haven't been to the rest of the country, but it definitely is on my bucket list on other places to check out. Especially the tip of South America seems to be really interesting. But anyways, so this campaign is being put on by Chile, trying to bring increase the number of tourists that are coming to South America, or coming to Chile. Again, a pretty cool place. If you want to experience, sort of like LA weather, but in South America, really honestly, like Santiago is probably like San Francisco in terms of weather. So it's not too cold, and it's same sort of topography of sort of like Los Angeles. It's pretty close to the mountains, just like we are here, except it's the Andes, which are a lot taller than the San Gabriels. But anyways, so other ways of increasing the number of tourists, you can utilize travel agents or tour operators. And so what some places will do, and especially cruise lines do this a lot, is that they'll bring in the travel agents or tour operators, give them, a free tour, or take them on a cruise for free. And then when those travel agents or tour operators, go back to the regular gigs, they are going to be promoting, right, the cruise lines or this tourist destination or whatever. And so having good relationships with these travel agents or tour operators is a way of increasing the number of tourists. PR, publicists. There are actually parts of the world where they do hire publicists to work on their travel or visitors. And the whole point of doing PR, if you're thinking about in the tourism sector, is essentially promoting the good parts of your country, right, or of your culture. And if anything happens to be bad, then, you know, it's your way of addressing, how is your country addressing, let's say, an American got mugged or something like that, I don't know. But so public relations is a good way of basically handling something unfavorable that happens, but also highlighting the favorable. And so other examples of PR would be free media coverage, right? So for example, anytime there is, let's say, a big sporting event, like let's say it's the Olympics or the World Cup or the Super Bowl or something like that, it's a way of showing off the city in some regards, because oftentimes, I don't know if anybody's ever watched the Olympics, but oftentimes before the event begins, they'll show off beautiful parts of the country. And so that's a good PR tool for the country. Also pop culture, anytime a film is shot on location in your area, it could be a good PR tool. A television program. So for instance, when I was in Chile, I was in Santiago, but I also went to this place up in the Andes because I was trying to get away and write a book. And nobody, I mean, you could hardly get reception in these mountains. But everybody knew, or let's got around, I should say, that I worked in the OC. So the only reason they knew or cared about me was because of the program called the OC. And so they were asking me questions about the OC. So even though the OC wasn't, you know, shot in the OC, it was named the OC, but it had good PR for Orange County. Magazines also provide that, but good PR as well. No, I have not. There's many places that I have not been to. I've been to a lot of places, but there's so many places that I would like to go to. Like Africa, for instance. I'm dying. I would love to go to Russia, but haven't been. Anyways, service culture. So that's important. So one of the things here in the United States, we are spoiled by service culture, meaning good customer service. And we're one of the few places in the world where it's sort of ingrained in our culture, this idea, even though I don't agree with it, the customer's always right. I hate that phrase. But if you're working in the service industry, that's an important mantra, this idea that the customer is always right. It's important because if the traveler has a good experience with you, they're going to go out and tell their friends, and it creates a word of mouth. Right. So this, for those of you who work in the service industry, good for you. God bless you. Right. Whether it's working in a restaurant or something else. And it's a tough job, right? Service jobs are tough jobs, but most places in the world don't have a service culture. We do. And, but that's also something that can be developed. And if you want to improve or increase the number of tourists to come to your city or country or whatever, this idea of catering to customers is important. Sales promotions. So this is also very important. Like, for instance, I don't know if anybody's seen this. This is a campaign that was put on by Santa Maria. I don't know if anybody's been to Santa Maria. Santa Maria has great wines. Think about Paso Robles and places like that. It's up the coast near Santa Barbara. And so Santa Maria had a really cool campaign where essentially they would essentially give you $100 to spend if you spent, I guess this has happened during the stimulus, we're receiving stimulus checks. And this sold out really quickly. But this is a really clever idea when it comes to sales promotions. It's a really clever short-term campaign that was put on by Santa Maria, California. And if you're thinking about, oh, I'm gonna take advantage of it now, I don't think they're having it anymore. I think they stopped it. Now, UNESCO, if you're wondering, UNESCO is really cool because if you're thinking about cool places to go visit, you should check out their website, UNESCO, because it puts on a list of like cool places to visit throughout the world. So if you're thinking about cool places to visit that are sort of off the beaten path, UNESCO is the site for you. And so what else was I going to say about UNESCO? It highlights places that are of natural beauty. So if you're trying to find sort of somewhat places that are sort of quote unquote virginal, granted those places are few and far between nowadays, but things that are essentially unspoiled, that's a good place to check out UNESCO. And so UNESCO also puts on a list of places that are a good tourist destination when it comes to ecotourism. And so you want to be on the good UNESCO list and on the bad UNESCO list. So here's a picture of Costa Rica. I don't know if anybody's ever been to Costa Rica, but Costa Rica for a period of time was knocking down a lot of its forests. And so basically the Costa Rican government and the people, basically there was a change in philosophy. And basically the idea was we need to preserve nature and maybe we can create a revenue stream through nature. And so Costa Rica has been in this huge campaign for quite a long time now of rejuvenation. This idea of rehabilitating its forests, its plants, its wildlife to bring tourists to Costa Rica. And again, the idea behind this is to make nature a revenue stream. So this is another example of rejuvenation. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to New Zealand, but New Zealand is trying to protect this bird. This bird right here is called the takahi. Looks a little bit like a chicken. And so it's actually a really pretty bird. And so it's called the takahi. Now the takahi does not fly. And one of the interesting things about New Zealand is that none of the birds can fly. And so the reason being is because there were no predators in New Zealand. And so the birds never evolved this thing, wings to fly, to get away from the predator. All the predators time in New Zealand were all birds. So anyways, so the takahi along with all these other birds became endangered, and the takahi here is critically endangered. I want to say there's like maybe 100 birds left in all of New Zealand. And so the takahi essentially was killed by people because apparently it's tasty. It was killed by rats. It was killed by dogs, and it was killed by cats, because when the Europeans came to New Zealand, they brought their pets, they brought their dogs, they brought their cats, and they brought rats. And these rats and these cats and these dogs were essentially in paradise because none of these birds can get away from them, and because they couldn't fly away. And so a lot of the wildlife in New Zealand is critically endangered, and the takahi is one of them. And so now, this is outside of, this is outside of Wellington. Yeah, Wellington. This is outside of Wellington, New Zealand. And the New Zealanders, the Kiwis, have essentially built this special fence. I know it looks like a normal fence to all of you. This is a terrible picture. I couldn't get a better picture. But anyways, it's a 6-foot fence. They also dug the fence like 4 feet down. So there's no way you can dig, so no way an animal can dig under the fence. And they also put this little barrier up on top of the fence. So that way, so a dog or a cat or some sort of, creature that's 4 legs cannot scale the fence. So I don't know if anybody's ever seen coyotes or encountered coyotes, but coyotes can leap 6-foot walls or scale 6-foot fences, no problems. So if you happen to have a little dog and you have a fence, just bear in mind that coyotes can jump those walls and fences very easily and get to your little dogs. But anyways, the point of building these fences was to keep the predators out of this compound, and they're trying to rehabilitate the takahe. So the New Zealanders, the takahe, are trying to save the takahe who are critically endangered right now. Now, one more thing going back to UNESCO. So you want to stay off the bad list. So there's a good list, which is rejuvenation, which is what Costa Rica did and is doing. And basically, stagnation means that you're going the opposite way. So you're going from, instead of improving the environment, you're totally damaging or ruining the environment. And the country that's worst on the list, at least was pre-COVID, was Nepal. So this is not my picture. I've never been in Nepal, although I would like to go. But this is a picture from one of my friends. But anyways, so what's happening in Nepal is that a lot of people have been trying to hike up the Mount Everest, which is the highest mountain in all of the world. And so a lot of tourists or people who are trying to climb the Himalayas or go up Mount Everest are leaving behind tons of trash behind. They're not picking up the trash. And so they're leaving all sorts of garbage in the snow. And it's damaging the environment of the Himalayas. And so also because of climate change and all sorts of weird things are happening on the Himalayas. So for example, not to gross anybody out, one of the things that's happening in the Himalayas is that their dead bodies are being exposed on the Himalayas now. So because the ice is melting, people have died going up the Himalayas, and they can't bring you back down because it's too taxing on the body. They leave you up there entombed in ice. And so, but now that the ice is melting, it's exposing dead bodies. So that's the other thing that's happening because of climate change. But anyways, Nepal, stagnation. It's the environment is going in the opposite direction. And Nepal right now is worse on the list, whereas Costa Rica and New Zealand are high up on the list. And Costa Rica is number 1. Questions? So remember, Costa Rica, good, and Nepal, bad. I'm giving you the spectrum, and then again, the New Zealanders are trying really hard to save their wildlife, really hard, going to extreme measures actually. Anyways, elves. So now talking about specific tourist attractions or destinations or streets or areas, Broadway. So the Elves is important because it was the first Broadway hit. So again, Elves is important because it was the first Broadway hit. It was a musical. I think they had 50 shows. So again, the Elves, first Broadway hit. It happened to be a musical. I think it was in 1857 or maybe 1867. I can't remember if it was 57 or 67, but it happened in the 1800s. It was a long time ago. So the Theater Syndicate. So the Theater Syndicate was led by a guy by the name of Abe Erlanger. So I only gave you his last name, Erlanger. His first name was Abe Erlanger. And so the theater syndicate was a monopoly. It was led by Abe Erlanger. And Erlanger was this pretty rotten guy. He really was I don't know, there's really no good way of describing him. He really was a pretty mean dude. So the theater syndicate controlled all the bookings for shows on Broadway. So if you wanted to get booked as a producer, you needed to get booked through Erlanger or the theater syndicate. But Erlanger in particular was really abusive. So he would, like, for instance, if you wanted, let's just say that he liked one of the showgirls, for instance, and he said, well, if you want to get booked on your show on Broadway, I need to spend some time with this young lady over here. Things like that. I mean, he really was just very abusive when it comes to his power, to a pretty extreme extent. So again, Abe Erlanger, kind of a rotten guy, actually not kind of, a really rotten guy. And again, Erlanger and the rest of the theater syndicate controlled all the bookings. So it was a monopoly when it comes to the early days of Broadway. Now, I'm jumping a little bit, but just not to confuse you. So the Sherbert brothers and the theater syndicate went to war. They were allies for a short period of time, but then they became mortal enemies. What happened was one of the Sherbert brothers was killed in a train accident, and essentially the theater syndicate, led by Erlanger, didn't want to honor one of their deals, and so it created a war between the Sherbert brothers and the theater syndicate. Now, the Sherbert brothers eventually will overcome and become the most powerful group on Broadway. And the Sherbert brothers, what they did was that they, instead of buying up the theaters or buying up the venues, they bought up all the talent. So again, the Sherbert brothers became the powerful group, overtaking the theater syndicate by buying up or owning the talent. So the theater syndicate owned a lot of venues, but the Sherbert brothers decided, well, we'll own some venues, but we'll also buy up all the talent. So the theater district is 41 theaters located in the Broadway area of New York City. Over 14.7 million attendees came to watch Broadway plays. Again, this is pre-COVID, because during COVID, it was completely shut down. 2019, it made $1.8 billion because, again, I'm pretty sure Broadway got shut down in March of 2020. So I'm giving you 2019 figures. Most of the people who went to go visit a Broadway play, or I should say, went to go see a Broadway play, were visitors. 65% of them were visitors. Most people who go watch plays make a lot of money. So the average person who buys or attends a Broadway play, if you're curious, makes over $200,000 a year. What is a Broadway theater? So a Broadway theater is at least 500 seats. So what is a Broadway theater? At least 500 seats. So the venue has to seat at least 500 people. If it seats less than 500 people, it is not a Broadway theater. It's not considered part of Broadway. Must seat, again, a minimum of 500 people. So again, the Sherbert brothers are now the most powerful group within or amongst the most powerful group of Broadway, even nowadays. And again, they took over power from the theater syndicate by buying up the talent. The two largest theaters are the Gershwin and the Lyric. Now, the Gershwin is a little bit bigger. So again, the Gershwin is the largest. It's a little bit bigger than the Lyric. Those two are the largest theaters in terms of seating capacity on Broadway. But again, Gershwin is number one. Lyric is a close second, but both of them are by far the biggest They seat over 1,900 people, which is a lot of people. Phantom of the Opera, pretty cool opera, pretty good play, is the longest running Broadway play. So Phantom of the Opera, longest running Broadway play. Longest running Broadway play, Phantom of the Opera. The Lion King is the play that's generated the most revenue. So in The Lion King, highest grossing Broadway play in the history of Broadway. Hamilton is the play that made the most revenue in 2019, pre-COVID. So again, Phantom of the Opera, longest running. Lion King, highest grossing or most revenue of any play in the history of Broadway. And Hamilton generated the most revenue in 2019. All right, we're getting, I think, close to the last slide. Maybe we'll go one more after this. But anyways, 237 million visitors went to go to national parks throughout the United States. By the way, if you're curious, that is a big dip or drop from the previous year. The previous year was well over 300 million. So 237 million seems like a lot, and it is a lot, but it's a big drop from 2019. Largely, again, because of COVID. What is the first U.S. national park? It is Yellowstone. Yellowstone is, or was, or still is, I should say, the first national park, Yellowstone. And that was created in 1872. 1872, Yellowstone. What is the most visited national park in the United States? It is the Great Smoky Mountains. Super cool park. It's in the Appalachians. So again, the Great Smoky Mountains over in the East Coast in the Appalachian Mountains. It's part of like Tennessee and those states. Great Smoky Mountains, most visited. Largest national park in all of the world is Northeast Greenland National Park, which I think Greenland's part of Iceland. But anyways, Northeast Greenland National Park. And so tourism, nature-based tourism is a huge deal, not only here in the United States, mind you, but especially in emerging economies, whether it's Central America, South America, Africa, the Caribbean. This idea of protecting wildlife and flora meaning plants and trees and those sorts of things, has become really important moving forward. And again, a lot of countries throughout the world are trying to generate economies or build economies around this idea of nature and this idea of protecting the wildlife and protecting plants and those sorts of things. And again, the country that's the lead ecotourism leader is Costa Rica. I won't show you. Well, I'll show you a little bit of this. So again, Costa Rica is the ecotourism leader. You see how it benefits from its topography and volcanoes and the cool oceans and all sorts of things. But again, part of the reason that it's an ecotourism leader is because the government, as well as the citizens, decided to actually make this, a priority. And so without them making it a priority, Costa Rica never becomes an ecotourism leader.